Hello and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC World Service, the business podcast which brings you the trends, the money and the people who make the world and its money go round. Podcasts from the BBC World Service are supported by advertising.
An original series from Apple TV+.
I have visions, and I write them down.
From writer Stephen King, executive producer J.J. Abrams, and director Pablo Larraín.
Scott had a history of becoming unstuck to reality. He called it being gone.
There's a place. I'll take you there.
Was it real, or was it my imagination?
Lisey's Story, starring Julianne Moore. Watch the limited series exclusively on Apple TV+.
Hello and welcome to Business Daily from the BBC with me, Manuela Zaragoza. Coming up, pack your bags. You're going on a beach holiday. Just don't speak or interact too much with any of the locals when you get there.
So we literally trained thousands of our people. Tourists were operating in their own quote-unquote bubble because everybody they came in contact with was trained how to react to them.
We speak to Antigua and Barbuda's tourism minister about how this Caribbean island nation has maintained at least some visitor arrivals amid the COVID pandemic. But how quickly can the travel industry get back on its feet?
We don't have some form of international benchmark to work with to say that, okay, if we're all at 70% vaccinated, then we should be able to reopen our borders.
That's all here in Business Daily from the BBC.
Yeah, so I miss those early morning takeoffs where I used to take off along Victoria Harbour in Hong Kong and see the sun rising and all those sort of panoramas you get from 30, 40,000 feet, seeing Mount Fuji as you fly past from Tokyo or the Great Wall of China as you come flying into Beijing. They were always great things.
Matthew Wilson there was a pilot for Cathay Dragon, a unit of the Cathay Pacific airline. He worked out of Hong Kong, flying mainly into China and Southeast Asia. For a few months after COVID hit in early 2020, he hoped he might be able to keep his job, even though his fleet was grounded.
We spent the whole of last year just listening to hearsay, reading newspaper articles, talking to friends and colleagues every day, trying to get information out of the airline, the ups and downs of thinking things were getting better and things were about to open up in the middle of last year to a point where more restrictions were then coming back in, and then Europe started shutting down, and then realizing that this was going to be a long haul and trying to work with the airline.
Then in October came news that his airline, Cathay Dragon, was being liquidated. Matthew, along with the company's other 5,000 employees, was out of a job.
And it was at that point that I recognized that I would have to either hang around Hong Kong trying to pick up some bar work or make the move back to the UK and try and start something new. And that's what I did. So I came back to the UK with my wife and 2 dogs in tow and resettled back in an area where my parents live, up out just outside Edinburgh. And since then I took up the job of gardening with my brother.
So Matthew's given up the cockpit for the secateurs. We'll come back to him a little later because his gardening career has also given him a new perspective on the business of flying. But first, COVID has put at risk the $3.5 trillion that the aviation sector used to contribute to global GDP, not to mention the 88 million global jobs supported by aviation. The outlook is bleak. In the first 2 months of this year, international passenger traffic remained more than 86% down on pre-crisis levels. That's according to the latest update from the International Air Transport Association. It comes as businesses face another year of tight travel restrictions because of the spread of new COVID variants and the patchy rollout of vaccines. And it's not just pilots and aircrew being hit. The UN World Tourism Organization estimates between 100 and 120 million direct tourism jobs are now at risk.
Yeah, absolutely devastating. We saw international travel restrictions like we've never seen before. I mean, for at least 2 months of the year, globally, there was absolutely no mobility, which curtailed most economic activity and in particular the tourism sector.
Helen McDermott is with the research group Oxford Economics, where she's Director of Global Forecasting for Tourism.
I would argue that it is probably the worst hit sector. I mean, if we look at global GDP last year, we estimate that it declined by 4%. International travel activity fell by around 70%.
And that's millions and millions of jobs, isn't it?
Well, it has certainly impacted a significant number of jobs, but it is important to acknowledge that also you had furlough and job retention schemes. So to some degree, it's difficult to know how many jobs were truly impacted.
And I mean, what does it mean for countries that are, tourism at their core, countries whose economies ride entirely on tourism, given that we have absolutely no idea when travel will resume to anything like pre-pandemic levels, and when tourists will feel confident enough to step on a plane again or take an overseas trip?
Yes, absolutely. There are most definitely countries that are much more exposed. Small island destinations where travel and tourism accounts for 20% or more of total GDP. Now that involves most Caribbean tourism destinations. There are some alternative ways that they can facilitate international tourism. One example is the Maldives. They had an arrangement with Qatar Airways, which basically facilitated what they refer to as quarantine-free trips. So essentially, subject to testing at certain points along the way, residents of Qatar could book a trip where you didn't have to interact with other people at the airport. You were able to get on a flight. You travelled to the Maldives. You were picked up at the airport and you were brought to one of a selection of resorts. And basically, you don't interact with many other people along the way, which means no need for quarantine. You were able to enjoy the sun, sea and sand.
But perhaps not the culture. Helen McDermott there.
Just 3 hours from Miami and 8 from London is Antigua, the largest island in the nation of Antigua and Barbuda. Whatever time zone you're coming from, the moment you set foot here, you're walking in island time.
Walking in island time, but only within your own bubble, with minimal interaction with the locals. The Maldives isn't the only island nation resort that's been dabbling in quarantine-free tourism. In the Caribbean's Antigua and Barbuda, tourism accounts for a whopping 60 to 70% of GDP.
It has been really bad. And, of course, the island was shut down from about the second or third week of March 2020 up until the 1st of June. So during that period, there are no tourists actually coming to the island.
Charles Henry Fernandez is Antigua and Barbuda's Minister for Tourism and Investment. The island nation has been open to tourism again since June, as he mentions. But that brought with it the risk of increasing infections.
We realized that we had very little choice but to open the country back up. We had to balance lives with livelihoods. And one of the first things we did was the Ministry of Tourism, my ministry, approached the cabinet to see if we could have an epidemiologist-trained doctor come on board within the ministry to work with us on our protocols in terms of opening our air corridor, understanding what the requirements were from the airlines and the other stakeholders. In addition to that, we set about putting in a training schedule for all our frontline tourism workers, customs, immigration, red caps, taxi operators, all our tour operators, all our hotels. So we literally trained thousands of our people. That worked very well for us because to date there's no known case of a spread from a tourist coming in to our people. And that is because the tourists were operating in their own quote-unquote bubble, because everybody they came in contact with was trained how to react to them. So when you reach at the airport now, wherever you're staying has to be on a list. If it's not on that list, you have to book at another place and get a COVID-certified taxi to take you there.
If we look at places like the Canary Islands, they've found that the sort of type of tourist has changed in the sense that people are coming for multiple months. They're basing themselves there, working and combining their holiday with work while they're there. Is that something that you're seeing in Antigua as well?
Yes, and we have also introduced a program for that. We fast-tracked them in terms of the immigration status, and they can come and operate from Antigua. In addition to that, what we have seen is a very high-end visitor would look to purchase high-end properties because they realize that down the road they may want to come for 6 months.
At the end of the day, though, you can take all these steps, but if there are restrictions to travel in your source markets like the UK, the United States, Canada, the numbers are just not going to come back. And I suppose the question is, how do you cope with that as a country? I mean, what about government finances? I imagine tourism was also a very important source of government finances. Would you be looking for external financing to help you out from organizations like the World Bank?
Well, the Ministry of Finance would deal with that aspect of it. I know that they're in discussions with a number of lending institutions. The issue is we don't know how long this will last. We don't know what will crop up in a month's time or 2 months' time. So you don't want to go and overborrow too quickly. What I can tell you, though, is that we are now entering the phase of vaccination. We have been able to vaccinate 30% of our people 18 and over. Our aim is to reach 70% minimum by the end of July. One of the issues we have is access to vaccines. For example, you've seen now what's happening in the world. A number of countries have closed down their export of vaccines. So we have the first, for example, 30% of our people got the AstraZeneca. You now may find that the other set may get another type.
So you must be appalled by this COVID vaccine nationalism that you're seeing around the world. Or what would your message be to countries everywhere who are hoarding these vaccines and countries like yours for whom this is an existential question? I mean, it's whether or not your economy can make it through.
Yes, well, even more important than the economy is lives. The important thing is we're all in this together. And the thing about COVID is that it tends to mutate. So if you lock yourself in and only vaccinate your people, at the end of the day, COVID is out there looking to mutate out. And you may end up with a variant that comes in that makes your vaccine impossible to protect. So it is very important that everybody has an opportunity to get vaccinated. Because the longer that countries are allowed to languish without vaccines, is the more opportunity COVID has to vary. And that variant could come back and create another problem for everyone.
In the meantime, though, I mean, you're still facing this issue of quarantine, which I imagine is a massive problem for a country like Antigua, where people fly out, they stay for 2 weeks, but then when they fly back, they have to quarantine when they come back. And that must be an issue for you as well.
Yes, but as I said, I am confident with the rollout of the vaccines that we will reach herd immunity. In addition to that, I think the UK, which is a very important market for us, and the US are doing very, very well in terms of their vaccine rollouts.
But at the end of the day, I suppose the sort of economic fate of Antigua is linked inextricably to what happened to global tourism. And if global tourism doesn't pick up, that is a big problem, isn't it?
Yes, of course, it'll be a big problem.
Does it ever make you wonder whether, as a country, you're too dependent on tourism?
Well, the point about it is we're a small island developing state. The government has pushed a lot more into things like agriculture and fishing. We're too small, really, economies of scale to say go into manufacturing. So it's very, very difficult as a small island state with a small population to find other ways of diversifying, especially immediately with relation to what we're doing with tourism.
Antigua's tourism minister, Charles Henry Fernandez. He's banking on vaccination programs bringing some return to normality. But there's no guarantee that when herd immunity is achieved, countries like the US or UK will stop requiring that tourists quarantine on their return home. Some in the travel industry say that kind of uncertainty is making it all but impossible to plot a way out of the COVID crisis. Geoffrey Goh is chief executive of the Star Alliance, the world's largest airline grouping, which includes Singapore Airlines, All Nippon Air, United Airlines and Thai and Swiss Air, among others.
These measures, restrictions and quarantine requirements, there's such lack of coordination. One of the topics that we've been working as an industry is when would you consider reopening as possible with different countries? Is it when the population is 80% vaccinated? is 40% vaccinated. We don't have some form of international benchmark to work with to say that, okay, if we're all at 70%, then we should be able to reopen our borders. And that's what's sorely lacking in terms of international leadership. The other is mutual recognition of vaccination and test credentials.
So like a vaccine passport.
I think what is missing here is international leadership to drive the development and adoption of common standards about what a vaccine certificate or vaccine passport, however you like to call this, but at least evidence to show that you've been vaccinated or you've been tested and the standards of the testing. What we've seen for the past year is really unilateral actions. More international coordination is important to beat the path towards some mutual recognition. And the other I would add is the risk of politicizing the recognition of testing, or in this case, vaccination. Not only have we seen recently about the difficulties of availability of vaccines, but we must work really hard to avoid politicizing recognition of vaccines.
When you say politicizing of vaccines, do you mean that this move by some countries to, for example, just no longer use the AstraZeneca vaccine to opt for other vaccine, is that what you're talking about?
No, a little bit more complex than that. It's not just about stopping the usage of AstraZeneca or the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, but you could envisage a country saying, well, if you are going to enter my country, you can only enter if you are vaccinated by vaccine A, B, or C.
Right, so that might be an issue, for example, with the Sinovac or with the Russian vaccine, which aren't sort of popular in some other Western countries.
Potentially, and exactly those are the kind of challenges I think we need to be very wary of and need to work very hard, at the international level to make sure that we don't end up in that environment, because I think that would be quite disastrous.
Geoffrey Goh of the Star Alliance. So widespread vaccination programmes won't necessarily translate into the full-scale return of global travel, which brings us back to our pilot-turned-gardener Matthew Wilson. It's been a while since he was last in the cockpit, and it's given him a new take on his old job.
Going into something like gardening has really allowed me to sort of connect with nature in a way that piloting wouldn't have allowed me to. What I would say is that aviation gave me a better perspective of the impact that the human race has on the planet itself. So when you are flying at 30,000 feet across the eastern seaboard of China, you see the number of fishing boats out there. You see the magnitude of the cities, how they've grown, and the pollution that's been brought in. You can see the spread of the human race across the planet. And I think, what I'm doing now, I'm quite happy doing what I'm doing. And, I enjoy working with my brother every day. I enjoy putting my hands into the soil and feel like I'm doing something that's a bit more wholesome than maybe chasing a higher paycheck, for example. For me, like I said, becoming a bit of an eco-warrior, I really don't think that the industry can go back to where it was or grow at the pace that it was. And I think, if we continue on the way we are, global warming and climate change is going to be an even bigger impact. So for me, I would be quite happy to see the airline industry sort of put the brakes on for now.
Pilot-turned-gardener Matthew Wilson there. And in tomorrow's Business Daily, we'll be looking at precisely what he mentions there, the double whammy of climate change and COVID on business travel. Has a year of lockdown and Zoom meetings changed business travel for good? Join us then.
North Korea shouldn't be testing ballistic missiles. It's been banned by the United Nations Security Council.
North Korea insists their satellite launches for peaceful scientific exploration.
But when they launch a long-range missile, sanctions often follow.
Which means less money for the country.
Who then spend more money on missiles.
So where is North Korea getting the cash?
They could have stolen $1 billion. It
was almost like a perfect crime, meticulously planned and executed.
We had never seen a sort of attack like this.
Was North Korea behind one of the most audacious cybercrimes ever attempted?
The Lazarus Heist from the BBC World Service.
Search for The Lazarus Heist wherever you get your podcasts.
In business, having a platform that empowers your team is just as important as having the right vision. But bringing it to life isn't always simple. Monday.com WorkOS makes it easy for teams to reach their goals and bring that vision to life. Teams can create any workflow on top of Monday.com to manage anything they need. Create the perfect workflow for your team with Monday.com WorkOS. Start your free 14-day trial at Monday.com. That's Monday.com for your free 14-day trial.